Marcus Webb was 39 years old the morning his wife handed him a manila envelope on the kitchen counter and told him she needed him gone by Friday. He drove a 12-year-old pickup with a cracked dashboard. He owned two pairs of boots, one for the job site, one for church, and he wore the same canvas jacket in November that he wore in March. Denise's friends from the brokerage called him Steady Marcus, said it the way people say someone is harmless. She never corrected them. She handed him that envelope on a Tuesday morning. Inside was a single page, a quit-claim deed transferring his name off the house he had spent 4 years renovating with his own hands, tile by tile, joist by joist. She had already signed it. A notary stamp sat in the corner, dated 2 weeks prior. His name, on the line for a signature, was blank. She told him the marriage was over, the house was hers, and that if he made it difficult, it would cost him more than the property was worth. She said all of this with the same tone she used to order coffee. What Denise never thought to ask, not once in 7 years, was whose name appeared on the articles of incorporation she had unknowingly filed her taxes beside, or what the account number was on the black card, now quietly paying for the legal team reviewing every document she had ever signed. 3 years later, she would knock on a door she did not recognize and find Marcus standing in the frame, unhurried, watching her cry. What happened between that Tuesday morning and that knock would cost Denise everything she believed she had taken. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you're watching from and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came in flat and gray through the windows of his mother's spare room, and Marcus Webb sat on the edge of a twin bed with a mug of coffee going cold between his palms, looking at nothing in particular. He had been staying here 3 weeks. Pauline Webb's house on Garfield Street in Charlotte had not changed in 30 years. Same linoleum in the kitchen, same framed scripture above the bathroom door, same smell of cedar and dryer sheets that Marcus had carried in his memories since childhood. He had moved back into it with one duffel bag and the silence of a man who had not yet decided what to do with what he knew. His mother came to the door at 7, looked at him the way she had always been able to look at him, and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother always told me, a man who learns to be still learns to be dangerous. I didn't understand that until I was 50. She went back to the kitchen. Marcus drank his cold coffee and thought about that for a long time. He was a structural engineer, had been for 14 years, licensed in 3 states, with a specialty in load-bearing rehabilitation. Old buildings, ones people thought were past saving, ones that looked ruined from the outside and turned out to have foundations worth keeping. He had worked for a firm in Charlotte for 6 of those years before going independent. His clients were developers and municipalities, and twice the federal government. None of this was visible from the driveway. The pickup, the canvas jacket, the 2 pairs of boots, these were not an act exactly, but they were not the full picture either. A man he trusted once told him that wealth worn on the body was wealth spent twice, once to earn it and once to protect it from people who only wanted it because they saw it. Marcus had never forgotten that. His other phone, the one tied to the holding company, to the accounts in his sole name, to the 11 properties he had purchased and rehabilitated across 3 states over the past decade, stayed in the locked desk drawer in his mother's spare room, where it had always been, unknown to Denise from the first day she had walked through his door. The house on Cedarmont Road, the one now solely in Denise's name, he had purchased at foreclosure for $74,000 when it was a gutted shell with black mold in the walls and a roof that sagged on the eastern side like a sigh. He had done the structural work himself on weekends over 18 months and then hired out the finish work. And by the time Denise moved in with him, it had appraised at $310,000. She had never asked how that happened. She had simply settled into it, the way people settle into things they assume were always meant for them. He had met Denise at a charity auction in uptown Charlotte 7 years ago. She was in real estate then, sharp and quick, and lit up by a room in a way that Marcus found genuinely beautiful. She laughed at something he said about load tolerances, and he thought, this woman is paying attention. They dated for 14 months, before he proposed. The first 2 years of the marriage were good years, or seemed to be. He renovated the kitchen. She built her client list. He thought they were building towards something. He could mark in retrospect the exact month the temperature in the house changed. She came home from a conference in Raleigh with a new energy that had nothing to do with him. Her phone stayed face down. She started taking calls in the car with the garage door closed. He noticed, in the way he always noticed things, quietly, without announcing it. The manila envelope had not surprised him as much as she thought it did. What surprised him was the notary stamp dated 2 weeks earlier. That told him something specific about the timeline. And Marcus Webb had always been very good with timelines. 3 days after moving into his mother's spare room, he received a text from a number he did not recognize. It read only, "I think you should know what I know." He stared at it for a moment, then set the phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. He called the number back the next morning. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Tanya. She had been Denise's assistant at the brokerage for 2 years before leaving. She spoke for 11 minutes without stopping, and Marcus listened without interrupting. He did not ask questions she hadn't answered. When she finished, he thanked her, asked if she would be willing to write down what she had told him, and she said yes. He sat at his mother's kitchen table afterward with a legal pad and wrote 3 columns: what he knew, what he suspected, and what he needed to confirm. He did not shake. He did not raise his voice, though there was no one there to raise it at. He moved through the information the way he moved through a structural assessment, methodically, without attachment to what he hoped to find. What Tanya had told him was this: Denise had been involved with a man named Carter Hollis for approximately 14 months before the divorce papers were drawn up. Carter Hollis was a residential developer, mid-tier, well-dressed, with a reputation in certain Charlotte circles for partnering with the wives of men he wanted access to, specifically men in construction, engineering, or finance. He had done it before, twice, in other cities. Tanya had found this out by accident through a former colleague in Raleigh and had sat on the information for 2 months before reaching out to Marcus. There was more. Denise had transferred $47,000 from their joint savings over a period of 11 months in increments small enough not to trigger alerts. $800 here, $2,400 there. $1,000 tucked behind a home maintenance expense. She had opened a private account in her name only at a bank on the other side of the city. Tanya had seen the statements once, left on the printer by accident. She had taken a photograph with her phone. She sent it to Marcus as they spoke. His hands did not shake. He printed the photo at the library on Beekford Road, labeled it with the date and source, and placed it in a manila folder, the same kind Denise had used to hand him his eviction. Over the following 10 days, he pulled 14 months of bank records, cross-referenced withdrawal dates against her travel calendar, and built a timeline that mapped 41 transactions totaling $47,200 against 37 dates when Denise had told him she was working late at a client dinner or away at a seminar. He found the duplicate credit card she had applied for using their joint address but registered to a P.O. box. He found the LLC she had formed 6 months before the divorce, listing Carter Hollis as a co-manager. He found in the property records that Carter Hollis had filed a contract to purchase a property in Lake Norman, a 5-bedroom on a private lot, for $890,000. With a $200,000 cash deposit held in escrow, the escrow account had been opened 1 week after Denise cleared the last of the $47,000. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Documentation. Then he called a number he had not used in 2 years. The man who answered had once been his firm's outside legal counsel and now ran a 4-partner practice specializing in asset recovery and forensic financial litigation. His name was Gerald Okafor, and he answered on the second ring. "Marcus?" Gerald said. "Long time." "Yes," Marcus said. "I need an hour of your time." Gerald's office was on the 14th floor of a building on South Tryon, and the woman who walked Marcus back to the conference room moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had seen everything twice. Gerald himself was 61, trim, With reading glasses, he took on and off the way other men checked their watches. He reviewed the folder Marcus set on the table without comment, reading at the same pace throughout, never pausing longer at the damaging parts than at the ordinary ones. When he finished, he removed his glasses and folded his hands. The fraudulent transfer claim is straightforward, he said. $47,000, documented withdrawal pattern, LLC, opened in the run-up to divorce. Her attorney filed this as a no-asset dissolution. That's either incompetent or intentional, and from what I'm reading, it is not incompetent. He pulled out a yellow pad. The quitclaim deed is more interesting. You signed nothing. You were coerced through implicit financial threat to vacate property you own. That is not a valid transfer of title in North Carolina. She cannot convey your interest without your signature, and she knows it, which means her attorney either told her she could get away with it or told her she couldn't, and she filed it anyway. She filed it anyway, Marcus said. Gerald almost smiled. Then she has a problem, and so does her attorney. Marcus left that office with 3 documents: a retainer agreement, a list of additional records to gather, and the specific name of a forensic accounting firm Gerald's office used regularly. He sat in his truck in the parking deck for a moment before starting the engine. Preparation was the work. 2 days later, he drove to Kinston to see his uncle Devin, his father's younger brother, who had known Marcus since he was 9 years old and who knew Denise from 3 Christmases and 2 family barbecues. Devin Webb was 64 and had spent 30 years in commercial real estate before retiring, and he had a way of looking at people that stripped the performance away in about 40 seconds. They sat on Devin's back porch, and Marcus told him everything. Devin listened with his hands wrapped around a glass of sweet tea, and when Marcus finished, Devin was quiet for a moment. "Your daddy used to say, 'A man who moves in the dark moves for a reason,'" Devin said. He wasn't talking about the man doing the moving. He was talking about the man who lets him move. He looked at Marcus directly. "You stopped moving in the dark when you called Gerald. Now you move in the light. On your schedule." He paused. "One more thing. Carter Hollis. I know that name." Marcus waited. He lost a breach of contract suit in Mecklenburg County 2019. A general contractor claimed Hollis misrepresented the structural capacity of a building Hollis sold him as a redevelopment target. The contractor spent $280,000 in repairs before his engineer told him the building was a total loss and had been when Hollis sold it. He sipped his tea. Hollis settled out of court. But the case file is public record. Marcus drove back to Charlotte that evening with the windows down and the radio on. He thought about his father, who had died when Marcus was 19, and who had taught him that the most useful thing a man could carry was a clear understanding of exactly what he was dealing with. Not hope, not assumption, clarity. His father had been a pipe fitter and had made every measurement twice and never once lost a bit on tolerances. And Marcus had inherited this the way some men inherit their father's eyes or their father's voice, without choosing to, and without being able to give it back. Real power operated in quiet rooms. The forensic accountant Gerald referred him to was a woman named Patricia Sims, 53, direct, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades translating dishonesty into dollar amounts. She spent 2 sessions with Marcus's documentation, requested 3 additional categories of records, and came back with a 14-page analysis that established the systematic nature of the transfers, the LLC's function as a vehicle for asset concealment, and the direct evidentiary line between Denise's financial activity and Carter Hollis's Lake Norman deposit timeline. She also found something Gerald had not asked her to look for. Denise's real estate license had a complaint on file from a client she had represented in a dual agency transaction 18 months prior. The client alleged Denise had disclosed confidential information about his maximum bid to the seller, costing him $38,000 in an unnecessary overpayment. The complaint was still under review by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. Marcus added this to the folder without comment. That Friday, he drove back to Cedarmont Road and let himself in with the key he had never returned. Denise was in the kitchen when he walked in. She looked up with an expression that moved quickly through surprise and into something calculated. "I wanted to pick up a few more things," he said. She watched him. "I figured you'd send someone." "No reason to," he said. He went to the hall closet and retrieved a wooden box he had built himself, 12 by 8, dovetail joints, a thing of no particular value except that his father's cufflinks were inside it. He carried it back through the kitchen, nodded to Denise, and let himself out. She stood in the doorway watching him walk to his truck. He did not look back. He had everything he needed. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday 10 weeks after Denise had handed him the envelope. The location was a conference room on the 7th floor of a building in Dilworth. Neutral ground, attended by both attorneys, a mediator named Howard, a forensic accountant, and, at Gerald's specific request, a representative from the North Carolina Real Estate Commission who had agreed to be present as part of the simultaneous investigation into Denise's license complaint. Denise arrived with her attorney at 9:10. She wore a gray blazer and the expression of someone who had been told by counsel that this was a formality. Carter Hollis was not in the room. He had been served with separate civil papers the previous week and was currently in consultation with his own attorney across the city. Marcus was already seated when she walked in. She looked at him and then at the people in the room she did not recognize, and something shifted in her expression. A flicker of recalculation. Gerald opened the session by placing a bound document at the center of the table. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way Marcus had come to understand all effective professionals spoke, flatly, specifically, without decoration. We are here to address the attempted fraudulent conveyance of real property at 4418 Settermont Road in Charlotte, North Carolina, Gerald said. The quitclaim deed filed by the respondent is void on its face, as it was executed without the co-owner's signature or consent under implicit financial duress. The property remains jointly titled. Additionally, we are prepared to present evidence of systematic marital asset dissipation totaling $47,200 executed over 14 months through a pattern of transfers to a concealed account. He slid the forensic accounting report to Denise's attorney without looking up. Pages 6 through 11 document each transaction, cross-referenced against the respondent's calendar and the co-managed LLC she opened with Carter Hollis in February of last year. Denise's attorney opened the report. His expression did not change, but he stopped turning pages. Marcus watched this without comment. Denise looked at the report, then at Marcus, then at the commission representative she did not yet understand the presence of. She leaned toward her attorney. He said something quietly to her that Marcus could not hear, but read in her face. I think, Denise said, we're not finished, Gerald said, not unkindly. He placed the second document on the table. Patricia Sims's analysis establishes, with supporting bank records at LSC filings, that the $47,000 transferred from the marital account represents a direct and traceable contribution to the Lake Norman property deposit filed under Carter Hollis's name. That filing was made 7 days after the final transfer from your joint account. He paused. We are asking for full restitution of the marital funds, a corrective deed restoring Mr. Webb's interest in the Cedarmont property, and the referral of these findings to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney for review of potential fraud. The commission representative opened her own folder. Denise looked at her attorney. He looked at the ceiling. Marcus, Denise said. Her voice had changed. She was not using the boardroom tone now. I think we both. I don't want the house, Marcus said. She stopped. I want the $47,200, the legal costs, and the corrected deed, which I will sign over to you in exchange for your cooperation with the commission investigation. He folded his hands on the table. That is the only offer I will make in this room. Denise's attorney asked for 15 minutes to confer privately. He got them. When they returned, she accepted. She had arrived in that room believing she was attending a surrender. She left it with the understanding that she had, in fact, just been identified. He picked up the wrong man to build against. He knew how to assess what was load-bearing and what was not. She had never been structural. She had been decorative, and decorative things, in his experience, could not hold. 14 months later, Marcus stood on the rear deck of a house in Cornelius. 4 bedrooms, 3 acres, a view of the lake that changed color with the hour, and drank his coffee while the morning came in without asking his permission. He had designed the house himself and broken ground on it the previous spring. The bamboo floors were his choice. The kitchen tilework, hand set, Moroccan pattern, deep blue and cream. He had laid himself over 2 weekends with his mother, watching from a folding chair and offering opinions he mostly did not take. The Japanese maple in the backyard was 2 years old and already throwing shade in the shape he'd anticipated when he planted it. He had taken on 3 new commercial clients in the past year: a historical preservation project in Wilmington, a mixed use development in Nashville, and a federal contract in Washington that his firm would spend 18 months on starting in the fall. The Nashville project alone was valued at $4.2 million. He had hired 2 new engineers to keep up with the load. He had also, quietly, through a holding company that had existed years before Denise ever walked into his life, closed on 2 additional properties in the past 6 months: a warehouse conversion in Raleigh that would become 12 live work units, and a derelict Victorian in Virginia Beach that an architect friend of his had been begging him to rescue for 3 years. He had looked at the Victorian the previous August, walked its floors, pressed his palm flat against a load-bearing wall that had been there since 1902, and decided it was worth the patience. It usually was. A woman named Jade had walked into his orbit 6 months ago at a structural engineering conference in Raleigh, where she had just delivered a paper on seismic retrofitting, and had asked him afterward a question about load transfer that took 40 minutes to answer properly. She was 38, precise, and laughed at her own mistakes in a way that indicated she didn't actually fear them. She was inside now, reading something, and would come out shortly with a second mug of coffee without being asked. He had heard about Denise through his cousin, who had heard through someone at the brokerage. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission had suspended her license pending the outcome of the dual agency investigation. The suspension had become revocation 6 months later. Carter Hollis's Lake Norman deal had collapsed when the escrow funds were frozen as part of the civil proceedings, and he had since relocated to somewhere in Tennessee. The last Marcus heard, Denise was doing administrative work for a property management company in Gastonia. He registered this information the way he registered all information: filed it, noted it, moved on. Her mother had apparently stopped returning her calls. Marcus did not feel satisfaction at this exactly. He felt clarity. There was a difference. His mother had called him the previous Sunday and asked if he was at peace, and he had said yes, which was the truest answer he had. He set his mug down on the deck railing. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon in October, he was in the driveway unloading timber from the bed of his truck when a car he didn't recognize pulled to the curb. He watched it without changing his pace. The door opened, and Denise stepped out. She looked smaller than he remembered, or differently assembled, the way people look when the structure that was holding them up has been removed. She was not wearing the gray blazer. She walked toward him and stopped at the edge of the driveway. She said his name. He set down the last length of timber and straightened. She started to speak, something about how she had made a mistake, something about how she had lost everything, something about how she hadn't understood, hadn't known, hadn't meant for it to go the way it went. Her eyes were wet. Her voice had none of the brokerage confidence left in it. She stood in his driveway the way his old buildings used to stand before he got to them: present, but no longer structurally sound. He let her finish. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. She looked at him. "I mean that," he said. "I hope things get easier for you." She waited for something more, and it did not come. He picked up his timber, carried it toward the workshop, and did not look back. Behind him, she stood in the driveway for a long moment before getting back in her car. He heard the door close, heard the engine start, heard it pull away. Jade came out of the house and stood on the porch and looked at him. "You all right?" she said. "Yes," he said. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. Some things he had learned were worth the patience to build right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.